Welcome to our webinar, 6 Reasons to be Optimistic About Learning in 2022. My name is Joanne Quinn. I'm one of the global directors, and we're really excited that over 300 of you are able to make time to join us today with this really important idea about looking forward. We know we've had lots to look back on, but now it's time to reboot. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce our facilitator for today and the author of this exciting piece, Michael Fullan. Michael, you will know as a prolific author, as a professor emeritus, and as a global director for New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. I've worked with Michael for many, many years now, and one of the things I most appreciate is his ability to look into the future, to nail down those things that are really important that are coming our way and give us some insights into how we can take those and really make them happen for the betterment of young children. So without any further, I'll turn it over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna, and good day, everybody. It's great to be with you right now. These are really weird times. I actually feel today like I'm on top of the world, straddling a big, giant rupture. And when I look left, I see the destruction of the world. And when I look right, I see rebirth and growth. And I really do think we're at that precipice. And of course, Ukraine makes us feel more vivid about it, but it was there anyways. And so that's kind of the dilemma. On the positive side, bad things happen faster, good things last longer. And on the positive side, we've got good things, and we've got the chance, if we combine them, the 6 things I'm going to talk to you about, that to combine them to make it really happen. And it is already happening, and this is one reason why I identified it. I actually wrote these 6 reasons on December 31st, as I was last day of the year thinking about it, and it came rather readily because we had been working, our team, on these themes anyways. So they crystallized quickly, but I didn't want to release them until we had a little more room, a little more advancement. And so I think this marks for me, for us, and our team, our deep learning team is fantastic. And we work in 12 different countries. Many of you are from that part, but there's also many newcomers in it, and we will continue to cultivate that. So let's break into, I do know that when I look on the right side, that is the promising, the rebirth, that if it's going to happen, education will have to be radically different. Learning will have to be fundamentally different than it has been in this century and before, but this century, it has to be different. And some of that has started, and we can thank COVID in one sense for helping us perhaps define it better potentially. So let's go through this slide deck that will be available to you fully through our website, so you can get that. We'll tell you how to get that at the end. And I'll start with this book that I finished with Mark Edwards, a superintendent from the Northeast in the US. He had identified about 14 months ago, he said there's a number of districts that, despite all the difficulties, are really doing really well. And they're across the US. He was representing US superintendents when he told me. And he said, we've teamed together before. Can we do it again? Because I think there's something unusual we need to capture. And that novelty is the way in which certain districts are accomplishing remarkable things against big, big odds. And we talked about it, and we said, well, what's happening? What do we think is happening? We know some of the districts, we haven't delved deeply. And what we saw happening was what we ended up calling spirit work. Perhaps we called that before moral purpose, but this is a deeper sense of commitment to humanity. That's what spirit work means. And these districts, I'm not going to review them all, you can look, but I'm going to name a couple of aspects of it. They were huge districts, some of them 150 schools, 100 schools, some of them were 35 schools. And they were all moving forward with this incredible commitment to students and their families under really difficult circumstances. They had started before COVID, but in COVID, instead of slowing them down, it accelerated that theme. The second theme, and it goes together, is the science of collaboration, we call it. And it is, you can't get anywhere with the spirit of humanity unless there's a collective as well as an individual set of drivers, focusing on the right things, getting them done, and having everyone embrace and celebrate and do more of what is being accomplished. We asked Meg Wheatley to do a forward, and she hasn't been so much writing her books recently, but she took this on right away, readily, and said, well, there's really no difference between spirit work and science of collaboration. They fuse, they're one and the same. So she wrote a brilliant forward compatible with this. And what I wanted to say also is that these 8 districts were successful, I'm going to say, despite the system. The system wasn't actively working against them, but the forces that we know from this last couple of decades were accumulating and making it very difficult to be successful. So they transcended it because they were so powerful. I wouldn't say that it's a model that has potential for longevity. That is, there's only so much some can do without being burnt out. There's only so much you can do on the kind of the sense of spirit work, but you really have to see something, I think, moving in the society, in the world. And this is why we see it as a worldwide phenomenon, that it will only have staying power if we start to see ourselves contributing to other countries, to receiving help, and to seeing the work come alive, as we are in fact doing in some of our work that I might mention as we go along before the end. Some really promising work in our deep learning per se, system work we call it, and deep learning work. So let's think about then the science work or the spirit work as a backdrop. Those 8 districts give us a little bit of hint of it's even possible under the worst circumstances. So what could really be if we really went for it? And in our deep learning thinking, we have, I guess I'll say, more recently recalibrated, I guess, some of that. We started this work in 2015 around the 6 C's. You know, those the 6 C's, the learning engagement. You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't know some of our deep learning work. But as we get more and more into the challenges, more and more into the potential, and that's what I'm going to talk about, the immediate potential of really having breakthroughs of proportions that have to do with humanity, with evolution, even for me, of where the world is going and where education and learning plays its role. So the diagram you see on the screen now is what we have gravitated toward in the last 5 or 6 years. It has become more and more clear that the transformation of learning for students is the centerpiece, and it is in many ways them in charge eventually, not initiating it, not always leading it by themselves, never by themselves usually. That's the new role of principals, teachers, community, a lot of us, but it's the students as change makers, and that's a phrase that I mean deliberately. They are conscious as they get into this, that they're important to their world, they're important to their own future, to the future of others. And while they're learning, and you won't be able to change the world if you don't learn well about well-being, well about what it means to be successful in complexity, what it means to have the 6 C's synergize. You can't do it unless you're learning well. But the learning crucible is really, and it's like Freire, Dewey, others who hinted at this before, or talked about, did it. It's really the more you learn, the more you realize that you have to be immersed in society to learn, that you have to be actually improving, problem solving and improving society, because that's where the learning has depth and meaning. So there's many facets of this. I mean the individual learner in the center there. I mean the collaborative learner, when students are collaborating with other students and teachers. And I mean the collective change maker, because now it starts to be important for many aspects of the world they live in, their immediate community, the state or country they're in, and now we see worldwide implications where the students are our best bet for the future. So that's the kind of centerpiece, and you see on the sides of that kind of Venn diagram that deep purpose is really education and learning. Finally, this is really ironic in many ways, finally coming to realize what's the purpose of education. Many people have written good books about purpose, but it never stuck until now. It's starting to stick. And the purpose of getting good grades or literacy, numeracy, high school graduation, they're part of the foundation, but they're certainly not the fundamental purpose. And now we've rediscovered purpose, and it is deeply meaningful for learning and for commitment. So I'm going to call it deep purpose because it really is something that's we've never done before on any scale. And then the engaging strategy is really to say this will work if we have a multiplicity of ways in which students can be involved, parents, teachers, community, plus some of the things that we're working on with many jurisdictions. So this is I think the territory, and there's more subparts to this diagram, and we are formulating these. We disseminate through our regular seminars. I think the next one will probably be towards the end of April, as we disseminate the work because the work is coming from the field, but guided and shaped by those of us working jointly. I've always said, and I think even up the percentage, but the percentage I usually use is say 90% of the best ideas come from leading practitioners when we work closely with them. It's probably more than that now, but it's definitely practitioners shaping the world and being conscious that that's what they're doing. So I did this 6 reasons to be optimistic. You'll see it in this. We're going to touch base on them one by one, just to get these into your frame of mind. Escaping a bad system. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Recognize and working with our best allies. What are our best allies? If I'm a student, for example, well-being and learning. Everybody knows well-being has come to the fore, but how do you fuse and integrate well-being and learning? Well-being initially, I think, during COVID was seen, well, we better attend to it. Now it's seen as absolutely integrative to learning. It should have been there in the first place. Now it's there for forever, I hope. And then new powerful forms of learning, including our own, we say modestly, but also others. I'll identify that when we get to number 4. And then leadership. If you think of leadership, I don't have to tell you this, but how can I put it? Leadership has been many of the rotten apples, if I've said that way, in this transformation of change. It seems that we can all know good leadership. We certainly identified 8 of those in the Spirit book. But when you think of leadership on any quantitative basis or qualitative basis, you immediately gravitate towards bad leadership more than you do good leadership. And it should be the majority of people. And we're also seeing leadership get inverted, where students, teachers, local communities, they become the leaders that are leading system change as well as local change. So eventually it's all partners. But if anything, I would say leadership is kind of flipping on its head, where the leadership at the local and medium level is more important than leadership at the top. But the leadership at the top, at a minimum, we should, and seems awful to say it this way, but at a minimum, we should want to see the absence of bad leadership. That's not asking for very much, but it is actually. And the absence of bad leadership would be okay. But the presence of the kind of leadership that's going to cultivate these 6 reasons, that's what's going to make a big difference as well. So leadership is going to change in a dramatic way. So what I'm going to do in the next 12 minutes or 15 is talk about each of these 6 briefly. You can access this PowerPoint where we have some of it spelled out, and you can access the op-ed that we published. NPDL was also published last week by Ed Week. So I hope you will look into it. It's only a page on each of these 6, but let's think about what they are. Escaping a bad system. There's no other way to put it. This has been known, I don't know, some people knew it for 50 years, but let's just take the last few years. People were increasing, this is prior to COVID, saying there's something wrong with the system. The grammar of schooling, people who talked about that when Gel Mehta and Amanda Datnow, they were guest editors of the American Journal of Education about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I guess it was, when they started, or maybe a little bit before. they put out a call for research papers that showed transformation of learning on scale, at least at the school level and hopefully the district level. And they wanted to say empirically, research wise, what's new? And they had these papers come in. They eventually, in the AJE article, January 2021, they published the 5 papers that they found that were qualified. And they asked Larry Cuban from Stanford and me separately to comment on the 5 papers, which we did in the journal, and so did Jal and Amanda. And we all 4 of us drew the same conclusion, which was these weren't even radical transformation of grammar to start with. Maybe, yeah, you get a hint of it here and there and some good start, but none of them lasted. And none of them started very much. And when Jal Mehta did his, and Sarah Fine did their report, their paper, their book, which is a fabulous book, it won the Grammar Award. It's called In Search of Deep Learning. They called it In Search of because they didn't find much, and they want to keep looking. And so Jal is part of the work we do now, which is great. And when they did the AJE article, they said, as editors, there's a yawning gap between the way schools are organized and the way that students are wanting to learn. So there's no question about it. I can give you empirical research from U.S., from England, from Australia, around the world that shows that as students move up the grade levels, by the time they get to grade 11 or so, there's only about maybe 25% that find it reasonably engaging. And even those might not be for good reasons, but 75% of students not interested or downright alienated. It's incredible. That's the kind of system we had. And the good part about COVID is that it has jolted us potentially into a new system. And I use the word jolted on purpose because it did pull the rug out for all of us. It makes it possible then to do some new good things. I do think when I first analyzed this, I said, wow, this is a great time for innovation. It's all good. And then I said, there's pent up ideas. They're good ideas. They're going to take hold. We're on the road now. But then you know now that some of the ideas coming from COVID's freedom are not good. They're actually making matters worse. They're voucher systems, more confined ways of learning, less social development, less social trust. A lot of those divisive things are in the mix, and that. But I still think that now especially when you combine these with the other 5 reasons, we have been jolted out. Luckily, so far, a very bad system, and thus we have the opportunity to create a new system. So that's one of the 6 ones, the primary one. The second one is recognizing and working with our best allies. I don't know what your local experience is, but this is what I'm finding. We're very close to a lot of communities. What people are telling me is that students and teachers, individually and in small groups, are recognizing that their best allies are each other. Teachers and students, not everywhere, obviously, but a lot of the freedom that's come out of this has made it possible for students and teachers to be closer under the conditions. And so when they find each other their best allies, when they link to deep learning, as we see them doing, they become an incredible force. We can provide the support, some of the tools, but they're the drivers. And when teachers and students find themselves as allies, the parents are not very far away, then the community, and then you've got something. And so none of these reasons work by themselves. If you have all 6, powerful. If you have maybe 3 or 4, pretty good. If you have 1 or 2, not much. But this is the second one. The third one is well-being and learning are joining forces. You know that. But I would say there's been kind of 2 waves of deep learning since COVID. One is the wave that the increasing clarity that people adults and kids alike, were suffering from ill-being, that mental stress, all kinds of issues were involved. So it said we've got to attend to well-being because that's going to destroy people. But the more that we did in well-being, the more it became obvious is that this is a learning proposition, not just a save save the person proposition. And when it's a learning proposition, you combine it with the 6 C's and the well-being. And has to be combined and fused. And this is why we don't like even, I guess I'll say we don't even like SEL, I'll speak for myself, SEL as a label, because it looks like it's separate from learning. And I know that those of you using SEL are integrating it, but I would just as soon see SEL per se disappear and reappear integrated, where you don't make a distinction between social emotional learning and other kind of learning, and how that could be developed. It's unfortunate that, when I wrote the report last year on the right drivers for whole system change, I said it's really unfortunate that academic learning became an island. And all of you know what I mean, that when academic learning becomes the focus, it becomes the island of learning, it is going to not work for learning, even for those that we call the wounded winners that do well in that. It certainly doesn't work for most other people. And when you combine these things, you get a different equation when you think of well-being as learning, and drop the word academic learning. It's different. It's all then becomes integrated. I'll talk about this in a moment in the other reason where we see it reappear better in our work and the work of the group that calls itself SOLD. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So this is, now we come to the better, newer work. New, more powerful forms of learning are on the rise, absolutely, for sure. So we start with the new pedagogies for deep learning. I mentioned 2015 or so, where we started on a small scale. It got, I will say it moved forward steadily but modestly in the years as we got better defining the model, up until about the 2019 period. And then it kind of slowed down during COVID, the initial parts of COVID. And then as the possibilities and the necessities of COVID became exposed, deep learning, our deep learning, jumped into the picture again. And now we have more people than ever before coming to us spontaneously. Before we would present it, and some people say, "Oh, that sounds good. Let's participate." Now we don't have to present it. We have people coming to us, or not using it and not coming to us. And so we, in the eight districts that we have in the Spear book, Jefferson County, which was a district that was stuck, 150 schools, when the new superintendent, who was Marty Polio, secondary school principal, he was appointed 2017 as the superintendent. He said we have 150 independent contractors, 150 islands here. We don't have a system. So he set in place jointly with leadership and new leadership that came along, and said we're going to stand for involvement of learning. We're going to stand for equity, and we're going to stand for what he originally called the backpack, which still calls the backpack of skills, several of which are the competency of our 6Cs. And the whole place now assesses its performance, 150 schools, grades 5, 8, and 11, according to how well they're doing on these concepts that are really the deep learning concepts from the 6Cs. And it's really made a big difference. Now the whole atmosphere of that, you can read the short case study in the book, has changed because of that. And they have broken new grounds on assessment of learning, on the development of the interest of students and teachers and community, a night and day in 3 or 4 years. And during COVID, I might say, about this. So this is our own deep learning. In addition to that, the group called SOLD, which is the science of learning and development. So small O, science of learning and development. Pam Cantor and David Osher, they wrote a book that came out about 6 weeks ago, and it is called SOLD, and it's about the what the neuroscience, the learning sciences, all the things we read about have been strongly developing over the last 10 years. And what they've been able to do is represent how these new learning science breakthroughs make it possible for people to go deep into equity, deep into culture, deep into learning relationships, deep into not only cognitive, but also social and emotional learning integrated. And they've mapped it out, and we've begun to relate to them back and forth about this. So we really feel there's a new set of depth of learning in their work and in our work that really is compatible to each other and is present and fits exactly what people want. And people are now picking it up, I guess I'll say spontaneously. So we're working in California now quite a lot, and a group will call us, for example, Anaheim High School District, which is just as a district of high schools. They're using 5 of the 6 C's, and they're getting incredible progress, new success with students who are going on to post-secondary learning and doing better than any of their other counterparts, even those that say we're ahead of them beforehand, because they're implementing this very knowledge base, and they're doing it district-wide with under conditions that are really difficult. And it really is night and day. If you were to ask them, what was it like 5 years ago before you did this, and what's it like now? It will be that it will be the difference between the rupture on the left side, deterioration, versus the kind of moving forward into nirvana. They really have grabbed it and have done it with some outside help, but really kind of initiative by themselves. So more and more people are drawing on these powerful forms of learning, even without help, you can put it that way. And now with help, which is either linking up with SOLD or linking up with us or linking up with each other and forming networks as we are and as they are without that help. So this is fantastically encouraging because it's specific, and we will learn on the ground what it looks like. And when it comes to change, it always comes back to purpose. It becomes back to a joint determination. It comes back to collaborative commitment. All of those things which are the strength of input into the quality of the solution, but also the depth of institutionalization that builds it into the system, that makes it a permanent base in the culture. And I'm talking about districts with 150 schools down to 30 schools, whatever the numbers are. So this, remember, these are we're combining these 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think this is really really encouraging when you combine them. This number 5, diverse leadership will grow and present new benefits. There's there's some evidence here, but I hesitate to say it's absolutely true. But you can get it intuitively by putting it this way: if someone has struggled and come up through the struggling ranks and been successful in the way that I'm talking about, they make for better leaders than someone who had relatively smoother sailing. Makes intuitive sense that if I've struggled, I know what it's like to overcome resilience, to overcome barriers. I know what success feels like. I know now that I can help lead it, so that all of our populations are more diverse by definition. More diversity means just sheer numbers. There will be a rise of different kind of leaders. And my sense of this early research is this diversity will pay off in greater quality of leadership, and that this leadership will be a collective. It would be more diverse. It will be more connected to the culture, to the relationships. A big word we have for leadership in nuance is contextual literacy. We coined that word. I think we coined it. Contextual literacy is when people understand the context in which they're in. And when you change the context, you de-skill leadership. And COVID changed the context for everyone. So all of a sudden, leadership is at a premium. Whoever has been a leader before is now de-skilled. They have to learn the new skills. Or when you change a job, you're de-skilled because you don't know the new culture until you commit yourself to doing it. If you don't commit yourself to being contextual literate, you will not be successful. And so this is why we see the proliferation now of people who are diverse, who are doing this, who are committed to this. So I'm really optimistic about leadership that comes up through contextual literacy. Roger Martin, one of our colleagues from business, said that all leaders in effective complex situations that are successful are a combination of being experts and apprentices. So they're experts because they know some things. They're apprentices because they need to be a learner when they need to learn from community members and students. And as they learn, this mixture of apprentice expert is always there. Maybe there's more expert, but it's always a combination. You're always jointly learning from somebody else. So number 5 is reinforcing of the other 4. You can see how all of these come together. And then this one, systems will begin to emerge. We have talked about systemness. This is something that's in the driver's paper, and people always still should be a bit mystified. What does systemness mean, anyways? It doesn't seem to be a word, but it's a made-up word. But systemness is the sense that more and more people have that I'm in a system. I'm part of being a system. Maybe the system doesn't do me any favors, so I can complain about them. But if I really want to complain, I should start changing the system. So this is why the collaborative work we do is about collaboration to solve a problem in a school, but it also changes the culture of the school, that system, that subsystem. It changes the culture of the district as there's that kind of combination because you're interacting to change the system. When the district is part of a state that's doing some things, you have to really think of yourself as being part of what's the state policy doing. And while state policy doesn't help, and I've been, to a certain extent, a little bit skeptical when I've advised leaders at the local level, I mean the school level or even the district level, that you shouldn't, you may be stuck with the policies of those above you, but you're not stuck with the mindset. Have your own mindset. There's very few things of a positive nature on learning that you do that you need permission for. So keep doing them and getting away with the good ones and doing that. So that notion, that's one notion. Another notion, which is on the way to better systemness, as I put it this way, is that you want the people above you to like what you're doing, but not to run it. So I'm talking about collective autonomy, moving forward in that. But I'm not saying cut yourself off from the top. I'm saying be influential upward or deal with it. There's, as I said, there's almost all kinds of positive things you can do that doesn't require new permission to do it. So you should do that. Eventually, and I think this can happen in the next 3 years, is that this work that we even the people at the top know the system wasn't working. Even the people at the top know that the so-called bottom wasn't thriving, that the gaps were getting bigger. All of that is known. So if you take away some of the really strong blocks like standardized tests and punitive follow-up, which is waning now in its presence, it hasn't disappeared. If you take away that stuff and you have leaders then thinking about how can we participate to liberate other levels of the system, participate as learners. Yeah, we have some things we want to insist on in terms of accomplishments, but it's in this context of a greater sense that we can't change the system by ourselves at the top. So the way I would put it in a practical sentence is that you should think about how the system that you're in affects you, and at the same time think about the system you should want. That's the way I would put it. Know the system you're in, know its possibilities, know its limitations, but think about the system you should want. And when you find kindred spirits on that question, you'll find, excuse me, you'll find a direction and movement. So before we break into some observations and questions, let me put it this way. In fact, I would up the ante a little bit. I've just given you 6 reasons, and let's call it making optimism realistic. I'd like you, not now, but for homework, let's put it that way, to identify and act. I'm going to say 2 rather than 1 because it's better when you have an interaction. So take as a minimum 2 of your favorite 6, whatever they are, and think it through with yourselves and your colleagues, your group. What could you do in your own situation to maximize the use of those 2 insights? Any 2. Do all 6, of course, but any 2 is really what I'm talking about. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll facilitate some observations and questions. So let me pause and turn it over to you for commentary.
encouraging people to put their questions in the chat box.
So it could be an observation, doesn't have to be a question. Should be you could make a point, but let's see what's on your mind.
Michael, Margot McKeegan shares that she sees keeping the momentum going to work with others and keep going, she says. Keep the energy moving forward.
Yeah. I said at the beginning of the paper that when you read the full op-ed that in the very short run, that is today, people are tired to the bone, and don't have a lot of energy going. But this work I'm talking about is energizing. And that I can say also that you should tend to the well-being, the kind of recovery, getting it back, but you will be energized by doing the right thing. And when you're energized, your health, mental health, and physical health will improve. And so I think there's a temporary, it's kind of like revving the engine, temporary recovery still from COVID, but also I think a kind of chomping at the bit. We should not get back to the old way. We should get back and create a new way. So I think that is kind of there, ready to roll, and it has to be catalyzed. And that's where I think, and we always say, start small, think big, go slow to go fast. So this doesn't mean you got to do it all tomorrow, but it means you have to start it tomorrow or as soon as possible and see the momentum. And then it's always groups that keep it going. It's always collectivities. It's always your peers that keep it going. It's always good leadership that enables it. So I think the hardest part is getting a new thing started. And then once the things get in place, they do propel. And I think it'll go really fast.
Yes, Judy Fancher is talking about the comment you made about social emotional learning, and that it's one that she finds difficult to convince the team to embed, to integrate. So, can you point to any research or some logic around supporting engaged and meaningful learning that improves emotional health? Have you seen anything out there?
Well, we have, as you know, there's two things. If you go back to the reason number 3, which talks about new knowledge, we ourselves in the 6 C's integrate social emotional learning. We don't add it; it's in there as part and parcel. And you know, we've done an analysis of our 6 C's and compared it to all the SEL work, and ours comes out very prominent in all those cases. And what's better about it, I'm going to say, is that it's integrated with the learning, with academic learning. And so that's really a key part of it. It's not like we better do some SEL over here. It's integrated in the day-to-day learning. That's what it is. It includes that. It's equally, well, not more than equal parts because it's integrated, but it's equal academic learning, which we used to call it, and now the other learning. When Soul Group formulates it, they also integrate it, and they basically say, we have to integrate the cognitive, the social, and the self-development learning. Have to integrate those 3 in the service of greater and deep learning. So nobody is separating these out anymore. And I think the instinct initially, of course, is well-being is new and is so prominent. SEL will help in that. And even when it first came out, it was thought about as, well, if we get SEL, grades will improve. That's definitely the wrong way to think about it now, because well-being is about being an effective human being. And learn. The more you learn in relation to that as well, you're doubly effective because you got the knowledge as well as the orientation. So I think this is still part of the initial transition. When SEL became prominent during COVID, that was a good thing to start with. But I think now the work is to make sure we integrate that and still have it explicitly accounted for by showing why it works. And as you know, Megan, our work, we can show you that social emotional learning increases along with so-called cognitive learning when you have them integrated into the 6 Cs. It's more natural.
Yes, absolutely. Nora Krieger has a question here. She says, I think too many are exhausted. Although I think this work is energizing, but we have to get people to start, bring back their curiosity to look into new ways of schooling and teaching. How would you do that? So it's the old change question, Michael.
Yeah, it's the old change question. Well, I would do it with good ideas and joint determination. Our the joint leadership, and just take Marty Polio in Jefferson County. He had a absolutely not only stuck system of 150 schools, but they were going in reverse individually, and without even trying, they were going in reverse. And so he came along and he brought the integrative inspiration by focusing on racial equality, by supportive individuals, and by the backpack of skills. You can go there; they'll tell you we are energized. Even during COVID, we were energized because we were so downtrodden prior to COVID, even prior to COVID, and then more so during COVID because of the additional emphasis. So I think you do have to figure out how to avoid the awful term of learning loss. You have to figure out that learning loss is not the way to define the solution. Define the solution as learning redefined, the way we've talked about it. And you'll find that the academic learning will come in there because it's integrated, but so will so much else. And that people's psychological and social energy will increase, and that will be the best antidote to people that are burnt out, is to rekindle better things that are energizing. We know there's two kinds of exhaustion. One is a negative one where you're sleepless, you don't eat well, there's stress, etc. The other is where you're working hard as a team and you're accomplishing stuff, and it actually makes you healthier. So I think we have a long way to go to restore the healthy version. But I think if we should define it as we're going to go back and we're going to pay attention to the well-being part of it, and we're going to have well-being in the service of better learning. And I say again, you can start slow and go fast. You can say, okay, let's try this out. Let's get people to talk about it. Does it work? Let's move it. And then it literally accelerates when the go fast part. 6 months later, one could say. But you've got to start by redefining it. You've got to team up with other schools or systems that are redefining so you can feed on each other's energy.
Perhaps I'll jump in with just a question that I saw here in the chat box. When we're excited about moving forward, but you've mentioned that some leaders are really struggling or they feel de-skilled by the current circumstances, how do we move forward if the formal leaders are feeling that they can't? Any suggestions there?
It certainly depends on the particular context, because you have to know more about what the combinations are. But I would say that that you should do whatever you can do with your group, and don't ask for permission, because if you do bad things and you don't ask for permission, that's of course going to backfire sometime. But if you do good things, you gain political power and professional power, support from your community. So I think it all depends on whether there's local leadership. Joanne, the work we're doing in California now, that we have, where there are 58 counties and 1,000 districts, and then there's also the level at the top. That if you take the concept that Andy Hargraves and Dennis Shirley first formulated on Ontario, and that we built on, which is leadership from the middle, you can do a lot, I'm going to say, at the county level. We're working, as you know, in San Diego County, which has 42 districts, big. I see Karen Lewis is on the chat box. Monterey County, 24 districts, big but not. These are big, but this is the county saying, districts and county, how can we work together? And if they do it well, they will. The way I want to put it, and I don't mean this as subversive as it sounds, they won't need the top so much. They will need to have the top, like what they're doing. They'll need investments, all of that, but they'll be, if they're successful at that level, the level of the county and the districts, everyone at that level will feel better, do better. The system will get better. Those at the very top will, I think, take credit for it, let's say, but they won't mind it. They're not going to mind it. You don't need them. Yeah, you need the investment. You need the right values in the right direction. You need things not to get in the way. But there's a lot of possibilities we haven't tested yet, especially now. And I'm going to say, I want to think of it this way. Go slow to go fast. To me, this means think about these things, work about them. Don't do the right things between now and even let's take a liberal amount of time between now and January. Just get your head back on straight, get feeling better, make sure things are working a little bit. Don't try to do everything at once. Have a small number of priorities. Jefferson County only had 3 big ones. Most of the ones we know have about 3. So just do that. Work with your allies, get the coalescent, and then I think take stock again in January 2023, I guess. And then by that time, the floor will have been better established. Make it happen by creating the foundations, the leadership, and the integration with others that would be necessary. Integration, I would say the minimum size should be the district, or as much of the district as you can, but ideally it should be a little bit more than that. And then those at the top start recognizing what they need to do to take credit for it, to make it happen better, etc. And you will be less dependent on them on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Michael. I think we'll just, we probably have time for one more. Nora talks about how do we avoid the standardization of system change, the whole notion that everyone should look the same, all the results should be identical. And you talked a little bit about how we're changing, how we're going to assess kids. I mean, that's one way to really change how we think about that. Could you maybe give a few more details about some of the promising signs you see of us really shifting how we measure student success?
Right. Okay. So, yeah, 2 things. One is the nature of the goals, the particular goals will not be identical. So let's say that from our point of view, as we know, we say if you implement the 6 C's as a synergistic combination along with good pedagogy and other things, it will really work well. Well, people are not going to implement the 6 C's identically one after the other, one situation after the other, because every situation is it's contextualized, the word that we use for it. So it'll be your own version. Again, I use Jefferson County just because I'm referring to it in reality terms. But when they do the 5 skills in the backpack, which include some of the 6 C's, they are doing those skills in a way that every school isn't doing it the same way, but they're doing it in the same direction. Anaheim, the high school district, same thing. They're 5 skills, same direction, but variations on the theme. So there's plenty of flexibility when you have the competencies that we're talking about that would be part of this. So that keep doing that. I don't know of any higher level system leaders who would say, "Gee, stop doing that. Students are too engaged. They're doing too many good things." They're not going to be stopped. You're going to flourish. You're going to be leaders in most countries, let's say. So do it by doing it. And then I think the other part is that the assessment systems are the old assessment systems, standardized and punitive. They are on the run, on the retreat. And we are, again, we know this on our team, we're part of a partnership with Sandra Milligan, who's a professor of assessment at Melbourne University. And they have, they're developing new metrics, they call it. There's various other systems that have developing new metrics. It won't be a surprise to people. And these new metrics are replacing the standardized assessment. SAT has gone south. ACT, some of those, the other assessments still exist, but people are skeptical about them even more so. And we're seeing, by the way, that literacy and numeracy are increasing along with the global competencies. The mistake is not whether you measure the increase of literacy and numeracy, it's whether you have a punitive negative accountability mindset relation. If you have a developmental mindset to it, by all means, increase it and show the increase. So I think we need to change the practice on the one hand at the micro and medium level that I've described, and the metrics of assessment, which, as I said, not only is it a bit on the run, a lot of the leaders at the top level are more doubtful about that way of going about it. Not everyone, but lots, and that they're also sponsoring policy-wise and funding-wise new ways of assessing those things, and those new assessments are better, less punitive, more specific to what it means to be good at life, as well as good at learning. So we've already done some of the tough stuff in the last 3 or 4 years, which is to get out of the bad old rut and to get some new things going that are not tiny examples; they're big examples. The assessment in Melbourne is for at least the whole state of Victoria, but it'll be more than that. So I think we need to push. The more we push at the local and middle level, the more likely that those movements at the top level will happen sooner than later. But they're happening anyways. So don't sit around and wait for it to happen. Cause it to happen.
Over to you, Meg.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to share the last question, which comes from John Malloy. And I think you've touched on this already, but it's worth exploring further. So he asks, sometimes traditional education strategies get rewarded if most students graduate. And he asks, this is the getting good at a bad game question, but how can we help educators to see beyond graduation in this work?
Well, okay, John, we know quite well that you know from he's famous at least from going from a superintendent with over 500 schools, the Toronto district, to one in San Ramo, which has 36 schools. So that's a pretty famous step. But so this issue though, I think is multiple pieces of it. But let's take that. First of all, in most schools, there are subgroups that are not doing well, big subgroups. This is the equity question. I think San Ramon is not one of those, but there's lots like that. So they will be motivated to change so that this is our deep learning change, so that it will be more compatible and that the measurements will be such and they'll be finally more successful. Equity will start to be affected in a positive way towards greater equality. So that will happen. But if you are in a system where, let's say, a district where academic success has been fairly high, and therefore the propensity is let's keep it high, that's an interesting question because it's always potentially more likely you can change a system that's doing poorly than you can change a system that seems to be doing well, but actually not doing well is around the corner. Because academic performance, you can put it this way: if you go through and are successful academically through elementary school and then secondary school, and you graduate, and you go to university, and you graduate, does that mean you're good at learning and good at life? Right now, when I say that, I bet everybody is jumping out of their seats, thinking of a lot of people who are academically successful but are not good at life. So this means that. If you stick with the definition of academic success, which is literacy, numeracy, getting good grades, going to a good university, if you stick only with that, you will probably not be successful with your own students. One of the books called them the wounded winners. The price of winning was too much, but it's also they won't be that good in a diverse society. They will be less competent if they're only academically competent than if they were competent at the 6 Cs. It's pretty obvious when you put it that way. So I think it's harder to get that kind of district to realize it. But I think a lot of people in that very system realize what I've just said once it's laid out, once they start to think it through. So I think even those schools that are doing well academically, those districts, will be wanting to change to protect themselves against a future where academic credentials will not be sufficient to survive, let alone thrive.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I think that we could have gone on for another hour based on what we've seen on the chat today. We'd just like to close up now and let you know that we look forward to sending in the recording of this webinar along with the PowerPoint. And we hope that you stay in touch with us as there are more opportunities that are arising. Best wishes to you. Stay well during these very, very strained times. And let's stay connected because, as Michael has shared with us today, that's what really is going to make the difference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.